Hi, I'm Edwin Fukin, and this is my case study presentation on Colombia. So to start, I'm going to give some background on Colombia, its geography, and its history. Colombia is in the northwestern part of South America, which is a strategic location bordering Panama, which used to also be part of Colombia. But it has a very strategic location, very close to the equator. It actually has uh, borders on the Caribbean Sea and the Pacific Ocean. And it's in a very important area. It's also geographically diverse, as we'll go into the next slide. But on the right, you'll see kind of a synopsis of its major cities. And then another thing to note is most of the cities are into the north and west side along the coasts, with Bogota a little closer to the center as the capital. Major cities include Medellin and Cali, and then to the south uh, and east is a lot less developed and less cities. And we'll see here why as you can see, the geography involves the Andes Mountains coming in through the center or the leftish center of Colombia. And that's where Bogota is, that's where Medellin is, that's where Cali is. So these major cities actually have pretty temperate, cool climates since they are high in elevation. But Colombia has a lot of different climates. To the south and east is where the Amazon rainforest starts, and it's more, very wet. It's a rainforest, monsoon-like weather. And then to the northeast, you can see there's actually even desert, really hot, dry areas near, on the Caribbean side. So very wide variety of climates, very wide variety of geography, really encompassing all the major types uh, that you can think of, with snow up in the mountains and cold weather up to wet, hot rainforests and hot, dry desert. So historically, Colombia was created during Simón Bolivar's revolution against Spain in the early 1800s. Simón was a Venezuelan who started his revolution there. There was a couple of false starts to those revolutionary times, but he eventually succeeded in liberating what we know as Venezuela, Colombia, and Ecuador. And then after he did that, he actually went down to Peru to liberate that area away from Spanish, as it was still a threat from invasion. But while he was away, it actually there was a lot of kind of revolution and like counter-revolutionary actions. There was a lot of a split between conservatives and liberals, even post-revolution, that kind of eventually ended up tearing Gran Colombia, which was the combination of those three countries, apart. Simone had wanted to kind of keep consolidated South America and had a vision, something like the United States, of having a really strong, large uh, country, but ultimately that wasn't to pass. And a lot of it has been attributed to his personality. He had a very strong will, and kind of like the whole experiment was kept together by him. And once he was gone, it kind of just dissolved. Even while he was there, he wasn't able to keep it together post revolution. And then also, Colombia had South America had a much wider range of different ethnicities, different cultures, different people, and mixings, and it just like was not to be to keep the whole set of countries together, resulting in them splitting apart. And this is also kind of like a background for a lot of revolutionary activity in Colombia specifically, along with U.S. interventions there, which we're going to get into next. So the U.S. Viewed the Caribbean and even all of South America as its domain, not tolerating any European intervention there post-revolution. And a lot of the interventions that it did in the Caribbean was known as gunboat diplomacy, because the U.S. would use its navy to, blockade countries and kind of impose its will. And Teddy Roosevelt was known for carrying a big stick, and this was like his kind of philosophy of being like a really strong hegemonic power in the region. And that's what he was known for, and he kind of started this interventions. And specifically, how this is relevant for Colombia is Colombia used to, the Panama area used to be part of Colombia. And as I mentioned, Colombia is in a strategic region already, and when Panama was a part of it, it was even more so because that was the narrowest area to cross from the Caribbean Sea and the Atlantic Ocean into the Pacific if someone wanted to build a canal there, which the United States definitely did. Um, and so the ultimately the United States tried to negotiate an agreement to build a canal with Colombia. Colombia ended up not wanting this to happen. So of course the United States decided, well, if we can't get it this way, they fomented revolution in Panama, backed separatist movement there, and then also used their navy to blockade and keep Colombia from preventing Panama from separating from Colombia. And then they just did a deal with Panama where the United States owned the canal for over 100 years. Was really seen as not a very fair or good deal. But that was the price Panama paid for its independence and the backing of the United States. And of course, the U.S. got exactly what it wanted there. Further interventions, this plan Laszlo is the next major intervention in the United States. This was during the Cold War and the Kennedy administration, where they kind of backed Colombia against leftist guerrillas and try to help Colombia come up with a plan to battle leftist forces in the country. Ultimately, this kind of plan that Colombia adopted and the U.S. really pushed on them backfires spectacularly. The kind of battling against the leftist guerrillas that this plan ended up fomenting directly led to the creation of the FARC. Not only did it not defeat the leftist guerrillas, they became stronger and it actually really started a civil war within Colombia in all but name, and battled, resulted in this really long period of violence in Colombia since the 50s and 60s, all the way, to almost modern times until very recently, when there was a peace treaty signed with the FARC. But there are still many guerrilla forces within Colombia that are being dealt with. And this is really what led to kind of the creation of this military state and in Colombia, and that we'll talk about later in the presentation. But yeah, and so the last main point of interventions results in the drug war, which again comes from here. So the leftist guerrillas funded a lot of their activities through growing coca, which is used to create cocaine. And the U.S. Had its drug wars in the 70s and 80s that it started, where it really tried to crack down on the importation of drugs and really pushed spraying dangerous carcinogenic chemicals on these farms, ultimately hurting a lot of people. Small farmers were using this, one, for their livelihoods, and two, these chemicals were not good for people. And the U.S. really pushed this during this period. Next, we'll talk about strong revolutionary figures in Colombia that were women. Here is a portrait of La Pola, who was revolutionary during basically Bolivar's revolution against Spain. And she helped give the rebels information and she worked in the Spanish government and was basically a spy. And eventually she was discovered and executed. But she was really essential to helping the revolution, and really kind of had her own political leanings and very strong opinions, and helped also inform the revolution on that, and was just a very well-known figure during that time. Colombia has also had many women in organizations like the FARC and the leftist guerrilla movement. That women have participated in. And they've been fighters. They made up almost 40% of the fighters within the FARC, so they were a very strong presence there. And despite all these strong female figures, like most of South America, women have not been treated very well. There's this machismo kind of view of how the place of women within Colombian and South American society. Uh, Violence against women has been a big issue, and something that women have had to stand up against. And there's been a lot of protests and revolutionary action against that. And there's, again, like, even as being part of, like, you know in the earliest days of independence, and even as these guerrilla movements, even then these women were not treated very well. Post Post peace deal with the FARC, a lot of women who were guerrillas don't know, didn't have the same support that some men did. They've, felt like, they are actually ostracized by society now because they were in a role that was not considered what a woman should be doing, fighting in these guerrilla movements, and now are kind of left to figure things out on their own, and not having the support they need. And again, then that's on top of all, the violence and other issues that women have to deal with within Colombia. So there's a lot going on there to combat that. Finally, we're going to talk about Afro-Colombians and their place in Colombia. There's a large Afro-Colombian community within Colombia, making up over 10% of the population. And this is mostly concentrated on the western coast, on the Pacific side, where those darker areas, there's 70% plus Afro-Colombian populations there. And, like all of South America, this population was brought in by force through slavery. And then, post independence and post the ending of slavery, have developed as their own demographic within Colombia. But, as in the United States, they've had to continue to combat racism, continue to combat ostracization, and not being fully integrated into Colombian society. And so this goes along, so we talked about the revolutions that were happening and guerrilla movements within Colombia. So the Colombian police is a very heavily militarized force in dealing with kind of terrorism. The FARC, the ELN, and other guerrilla groups, they really have a very strong presence, even much more militarized than like, for example, the U.S. police force, and having to deal with the violence there. And so this combination kind of leads to the next topic, where the BLM movement within the United States has its counterpart in Colombia, where there's been very heavily publicized police shootings recently of Black Afro-Colombians like Anderson Arboleda, who was killed by police, and there's been a lot of other police killings that have kind of come up, and protests against that, to fight against this police force, like mentioned, that is heavily militarized, and that really feels like it can do many things without impunity, and kind of like the Colombian people are basically standing up against it, alongside how the U.S. With the BLM movement itself has developed there. It's in parallel has been developing within Colombia to fight against these forces. So to conclude all this, the U.S. interventions in Colombia have been a destabilizing part of its history. It's led to the development of what we know as the FARC and other guerrilla movements that have been a strong and unfortunate part of Colombia's past, which then directly leads to the drug trade, which the U.S. then also intervened in, and to the detriment of many Colombians. So, that said, many problems in Colombia are a legacy of colonialism and the continued intercolonial interventionist aspects of the United States. And, these problems, kind of go down to then also like how women are treated, despite their revolutionary roles, how there's racism against the Afro-Colombian community, and police brutality against them. And so it all ties together through these interventions and Colombia's history, to lead to these problems and the kind of roles they've had there. But despite this, there is still this cultural exchange with the United States that is also helping inform, again, like the Black Lives Matter movement, BLM. Colombian society has taken that and started to try to change. There's a rising realization of the violence against women and how they're treated, and so it's coming full circle to go along and have progress, and move so that uh, hopefully in the future these issues will become less and less a problem. It will take time, and will. So these are all my. Thank you for listening. These are all the references I used for this presentation.